All right, so I want to talk about something called failure. Oh my gosh. This has been coming up so much in a lot of my personal life, my friends, my work, my sales team. And so, what do you think of when you think of failure? This is probably the biggest fear that most people have. I don't know one person that doesn't have fear of failure. So, with that said, just know that it's totally okay to have fear of failure. I think, like, first of all, we just need to admit to ourselves that we're human and we all have these human instincts to want to be safe. It's in our genes. It's the way our minds have adapted over time to think that, our comfort zone is safe. And so what we're really striving for is to get out of our comfort zone and break limiting beliefs. So one of the limiting beliefs is that failure is not an option. So failure is not an option. Why? Why isn't it an option? It's probably the best option because if you think about it, we learn from our failures, not from our success. So why are we so afraid to fail? When I was first starting public speaking, I was so afraid, you guys. Like, I would get up out of the room if I knew somebody was going to call on me to speak. And it was just this fear of failure. But in reality, let's get to the root of the fear of failure. It comes from caring what other people think. It comes from really just the society heaviness of being a failure in society. And what do we do as parents? We hand it down generation to generation, telling our kids not to be failures, and we want them to achieve all these things. Instead, we actually instill the limiting belief on them is that fear is not a failure, and that will actually hold them back in life. And so I was kind of going through this with my girlfriend, and we were just talking about failure in its sense. And so failure can be one of the most just paralyzing feelings ever. Have you ever been on if you've done phone sales and you pick up the phone and you're killing it, you're getting your momentum done, and then you get one person that's just like, oh, you're not very good at this, says something really mean, hangs up, and you're like, I'm a failure, and that doesn't have to be like that. And so let's switch our perspective. Let's switch our perspective to seeing the failure as lessons and seeing them as actually our biggest strength. So what I want you to do is get a piece of paper, fold it in half. On one side, just write out all your failures in life, whether it be your marriage, whether it be your kids, whether it be something you didn't follow through on, something you gave up on, whatever it was. And then in the other column, write the strength or the skill that you gained from that experience. Because when you kind of put this into perspective like this, you start to back up and you're like, maybe this is a strength. So I also wanted to say, like, the biggest thing in my business is the only way you can fail is if you stop doing it. So as I'm building my sales team, it might be slow, it might be fast, but the only way I can fail is if I stop. And so with that said, a lot of people get into my business. For instance, I had one guy get into my business in Canada, calls me, setting up his office, and he has one setback, one failure, right? And I'm talking to him and I'm like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that a goal that you want to achieve, let's say making $100,000 a year, so you want that money, that's your goal, and you're using one setback, one situation, one failure that'll keep you from reaching that goal? That's like literally like getting a flat tire and slashing the other three. Doesn't make sense, right? So let's start changing our views of failure, and let's it's almost like when I think of all my failures, I think of all my strengths. So why don't we just start sharing our failures with people and sharing what we got out of them? So what I'm encouraging social media to do is just start putting our failures out there, Like, I was like, why don't I just tell everybody what my failures are? It is vulnerable and it is uncomfortable, but this is how we can break society. This is a way that we can actually help each other and lift each other up and start sharing our failures, because we all hold that failure inside, you know? We all hold this intense emotion that's associated with failure, especially if it's a child, or if it's an old marriage, or if it's an old business that went under. You know, if we can empower ourselves to live in the moment of these failures, it's amazing. So for instance, yesterday I made a video to my mom, and it was very vulnerable, and it was me stepping up and handing the pain back to her. And one of the amazing things is, what triggered it, the failure, was my sister and I were on the phone, and I have always struggled with this weird feeling of wanting to go back to bed. You know, ever since I started working for myself, it's like this struggle. And she recently stopped smoking marijuana in the mornings, and she's like, you know what, I think I'm ready to live life. And right when she said that, I didn't realize that I grew up in a very dark place, and I was very unhappy, and I didn't know I had this fear of living like that again, because for me that's failure, and I was avoiding that failure, and I wasn't being honest with myself that that's really the reason why I would want to go back to sleep every day, because I was actually scared. You know, I had this inner thing that life is heavy, you know, and I just kind of sat with it, and I was like, oh my gosh. And number one, I haven't let myself do that in over a year and a half, but I needed to admit it to myself. I needed to admit to myself that that was still there, and that I still felt this intense fear of the darkness of my childhood. So I sat with it, and I just sobbed. I honestly just cried it out, man, and I felt so good, and I made this video. I sent it to my mom, and in those moments when I was like in it, I felt the transformation. I felt myself like seeing the bigger picture as I was realizing that I still held this fear. And it was so empowering, and it was so amazing to find out a failure, be in the moment with it, let yourself register it, and then do something about it, all within like a couple of hours. And I was able to be vulnerable and open, and I'm able to talk about it right now as well. So let's switch our views of failure and kind of enjoy the moment, and just start sharing with people, you know, what are your failures and what strengths or skills did you develop from them?